Hello, everyone. I'm Father Alexander,
And hello, everyone. I am the Reverend David Marshall.
and this is a Bridge Between where we bridge our knowledge of the text because we're not just doing the gospel, we do the other readings of the lectionary. Uh, we bridge the physical distance through technology that exists between us. And what else are we bridging today?
We're bridging some dietary laws and what to do with Thanksgiving.
So, does that mean I'm going on a diet?
Um, it, uh, that's a topic for a different day. And is it too early for us to talk about Thanksgiving? But I mean, because we're heading to the season of having parties and having friends over and family. And Paul gives us some really good advice about that.
Well, Halloween is just around the corner, so there's a lot of food involved, I guess, with Halloween. But I think it's never too early to start talking about the holidays.
Yeah. And does it feel like Halloween comes earlier and earlier every year?
Yes, because I think one time after St. Patrick's Day, I saw a Halloween pumpkin. So
No. After St. Pat.
no, I'm just kidding, but it feels like that sometimes.
Feels like it, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. All right. Well, to lead off Romans 14, I have a joke for you. You ready
Go
for a
ahead.
joke? All right.
Yeah.
Let's say you're throwing a dinner party for 100 people, and one of them is a vegan.
hmm
How can you tell? Don't
Uh,
worry, they'll tell you.
that reminds me, there was a show called Silicon Valley,
Mhm.
and in the show, it really just talks about kind of the strangeness that exists within the tech sphere amongst all these billionaires and stuff. And a lot of this is actually based on true stories that the engineers and people who wrote for the show had.
Right.
And so one of them said that they were a pescatarian. And I'm like, what in the world is that? They only eat fish that eat other fish.
Oh, yes. Yes. A pescatarian.
Exactly.
Wow.
There
That
you go.
that's interesting. Would you believe it that back in Paul's day, which was, let's say he wrote this in the year 58, is that a good number? Should we go with
That's a good number.
57, 59 somewhere?
Yeah.
Um, they were having issues with people and food, like we do today.
Yeah, I believe it.
Yeah. So the beginning part of Romans 14, which we're not going to read, I'm just going to summarize, and with a little bit of history to it, is that the church that he's talking about, which isn't technically a church, is an assembly. It's a congregation. It's a gathering of people. It's an ecclesia. There are people from all different walks of life and different religious attitudes and beliefs, and they're trying to figure out if you can bring in the tradition of your childhood and how you were raised. Can you bring that into the way? Because we were called the way before we were called
hmm
Christianity. So can you bring those dietary laws into the way? And then there are some special holy days, or some people on a particular day of the week, they think it's better than other days. And can you bring that into the tradition? And
Right.
how does all of that work? And then you throw in some very specific Jewish dietary laws, and this is right. I mean, you can have all sorts of arguments and consternation around all of this stuff. And so this is the group, and this is the setting that Paul is writing to, and he does a unifying thing at the end of this particular section of Romans 14.
And after you read this, I really there's I'll just say it right now,
Yeah.
which is I think this is so relevant to the church today, and maybe not for the reason that many people will think.
Hmm.
And so I want to tease that and let you read the text.
Okay. So he's boiling it down to there are some who don't eat this, there's some who eat that, and don't we all live and serve the same Lord? Paul asks questions which are actually statements. So when he says, don't we all serve, he's saying we all serve the same Lord.
Yeah.
And then the section that we're going to focus on today is he asks a couple more questions. Why do you pass judgment on your brother or sister? Or you? Why do you despise your brother or sister? For we will all stand before the judgment seat of God. For it is written in Isaiah, as I live, says the Lord, every knee shall bow to me, and every tongue shall give praise to God. Paul writes, so then each of us will be accountable to God.
There you go.
So why do you judge? Why do you despise? We're all accountable.
Well, and I think, like I said, those aren't questions. It's you are judging, you are despising. You shouldn't do that.
Right.
The reason I think this is very relevant in the church today is because I am a multicultural, bilingual person. I see the differences in between the churches of various countries and the traditions and feast days of various countries, which sometimes do not translate, pun intended, into the culture and the tradition of the church here, in the United States. So for example, if you were a person coming from Latin America where the dominant religious tradition was Roman Catholicism, and you even if you become an Episcopalian or become a Lutheran or another denomination, you may still bring vestiges of that with you. There are questions that I get asked by the Hispanic and Latino members of our congregation here during our service in Spanish is, may I still do this or may I still do that?
Right.
And the answer that I try to give every time is to, like Paul, ask a question, which is, what purpose does this serve for you? What is the theology and the meaning behind it, which causes them to think, and we always want to get people thinking about what they do.
Yes.
About why we pray a certain way, why we believe certain things. And so there's certain practices that I will tell them. I says, that's not really part of the Anglican tradition per se. I said, but I don't think it's anything dangerous. I don't think it's anything that is harmful. Now, there are some things that I will say that might be kind of something that we need to talk about because it's truly more cultural than spiritual. And so there are things that we kind of do have to have a conversation about. And if you respect the traditions and culture of another person to begin with and start off in that way, it's much easier to have that conversation.
Right. So I'm on a barrier island with a church that 70% of my folks also have places off island. So there's other churches they go to. So when we gather together and worship, there are some who stand for the prayers. There's some who kneel. There's some who all they can do is sit. Even at the altar, some people make the sign of the cross at sometimes, others make it at other times. It's this whole cornucopia or diversity of just outward expression, just some very simple things about do you stand, sit, or kneel? And some have said, can you please make some rules about this? I'm like, the rule is every knee will bow and every tongue will give praise to God. That's what we're here. And so if we're kneeling, is that better than the standing? Whatever. It's because each of us are accountable to God. And that's just a very small sense of what it means for a church like this with a whole diversity of people coming through.
And I'm going to even add another wrinkle to it. When we talk about kneeling, there are some people in our congregations who should not kneel.
Yes.
I mean, I literally had at one point in my congregation a person who I don't think they had knees. And for them to get down and get up was so painful. I told them, the Lord understands. Please. Yeah. He does not want you to hurt yourself. We're not ascetics here.
Yes.
And they were like, at first they were very hesitant. And they were like, but when the next time they came up for communion and I told them it's okay, they said, oh, thank you.
Yeah, right.
I said, the Lord understands what we can and can't do.
Right. I've had enough parishioners and family members have knee surgeries, total knee replacements, where apparently you can't kneel once you do that. And
it's very hard for many people. And I tell them, the Lord understands. But getting back to kind of the topic at hand here, when we talk about getting together for these holidays, I think this is a good rule of thumb that we might, implement, is to say, maybe you do things differently than I do. Maybe you speak differently than I do. Maybe your mashed potatoes are different than mine, right? But aren't we all here for the same dinner?
Amen. And aren't we here for the same reason? To give thanks or to
Right.
enjoy or to celebrate?
Yeah.
My grandmother used to put raisins in my dad's mom, to be very specific, used to put raisins in her in the stuffing. And my brother and I didn't like that. And so we were like, I don't want to eat it. And mom's like, you're going to eat it.
You can eat it.
And it's on your plate. You will eat it. That there's respect, that you eat what's placed in front of you.
Hmm.
So imagine in this case that there's some new believers that are a part of the ecclesia, a part of the congregation or gathering in Rome, and that they get together at somebody's house and they have particular dietary laws. Let's say it has to do with pork, and
Right.
somebody serves pork. The question is, do you follow the dietary guidelines of how you were raised?
Hmm.
Or do you follow a greater ethic, which is you eat what is put in front of you?
Yeah.
So some of this comes down to Genesis chapter 1, that God created all things and called it good. That a part of the church back in these days would quote from Genesis 1, saying, we can eat all of this because God said it was good. And that later on in Leviticus, they started dividing up clean animals from unclean. And we might get to Peter's story, Peter, the chief apostle, who had a vision of all these unclean animals and
Mm.
clean animals, and God said, go kill, eat. And Peter's like,
Right.
nothing unclean's past his lips. And God's like, I will tell you what is clean and what's unclean. You will eat. It's this type of presentation about how we should orient ourselves. And so if you go to somebody's house and their tradition is that you take your shoes off, before you enter the house, as we've talked before, you take your shoes
You
off.
do take
If
your shoes off.
Yes, if there's a tradition where they do this and then they have dessert later, or they have salad first, or whatever, just be a good host, a good guest when somebody's offering you to be a host.
So two things. Number one, I agree completely with what you're talking about because I think of, in the scripture passage where it says, and Jesus made all things clean.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
of course they didn't have the gospel in front of them when Paul is writing,
Did not?
so we
Right,
have the benefit of that.
right.
But, the other thing is when we talk about hospitality, there's two sides to it. There is the side that gives the hospitality, and then there's the side that receives it.
Yes.
And we must also learn to be a good guest. I don't know what it is with raisins, but this keeps coming up in conversation. You're talking about raisins and stuffing.
Right.
Somebody was mentioning raisins in potato salad,
Oh,
and for
yeah.
me, it's raisins in empanadas. I don't know why
That's
I
interesting.
see a raisin in an
Right,
empanada,
right.
but there's some cultures that is put in there for a certain flavor, and when I eat it. But it doesn't mean I don't go home and go, why was that in there?
Yeah.
But the guest part of my hospitality is being able to receive what somebody has given with love and care.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so maybe the advice that we're really seeking to give people who go to visit somebody's house, and then we'll talk a little bit about hospitality in the church, is to say, we know things are going to come up during dinner, things are going to be talked about during dinner that just people are not going to agree on.
Right.
And so sometimes the best thing to do is just to say, I'm not going to judge in this particular moment another person's political belief or another person's social idea. I'm not going to engage. I'm not going to do it because it's not always going to end well.
No. And that by your behavior to not judge and to let those moments go, that is a much greater sign of your willingness to be in relationship with somebody,
Mm.
even if you don't agree on particular things. And we were heading into a political season,
Mhm.
so there are plenty of things to disagree about.
Oh, yeah.
Um, but that whole question of why do you pass judgment on your brother or sister, and it begins with why. Why are you doing that?
I know why.
Um, okay, and why
Because
now?
because it's easy, it's
Okay,
fun, and it makes me feel good.
right, right.
I mean, the judgment, being the person who judges, gives us a feeling of satisfaction. I am above this person. I know better. I have a self-righteousness attached to that. Those are the people that eat pork. Oh, goodness. Don't associate with them. Or those are the people that they cross themselves a certain way. We don't do that. And it's just a way to feel above others.
It is. And, and I'm just going to throw it out there.
Hmm.
You may have heard people say, love the sinner, hate the sin.
Hmm.
I have read the Bible many times. I have never found that passage
No, it's not in there.
anywhere.
It's not in there. I think that's a theological addition to it, and we can actually discuss what we think it means. So go ahead.
What we could, but where in the Bible, what does Jesus say about what you should hate? Right? Is he focusing on what you should love and the behavior you should do, and then the way that Paul brings it all together? Each one of us is accountable to God, not the other person, not their belief, not what they do, not their supposed sin. It's our own. And God, who is the only one who can judge, that's the one who can pass judgment on us and our brothers and our sisters, not ourselves.
And I do want to make a clarification here because I have to do this very often when we talk about the word judgment. And I'm not the Greek scholar that you are, so you please feel free to correct me on this understanding and interpretation. When I think of the word judgment, I think many people confuse the term judgment with condemnation. And
Right.
condemnation to me is, condemning somebody to death, they're lost in that sense. But every single day we make judgments. And by that, I mean, we evaluate things. We evaluate information. We evaluate circumstances. If we're hiring somebody, we evaluate a person that
Yes.
we are hiring or letting go.
Right.
And so when I hear this word judgment, I think sometimes there's a little bit of confusion because we're not meant to just sit there and constantly be evaluating somebody. We're also not meant to sit there and constantly be condemning someone. But that doesn't mean that we never judge anything. We do
Right.
have to have a sense of what is right and what is wrong. And when I think of what Paul says about sin, the thing I hear the most is get away from it.
Mhm.
Don't engage with it. So if we find ourselves with a group of people and it's not something innocent, there's a difference between a dietary law and something that is a sincere danger to our souls. In that moment, we have to use good judgment and say, I do not want to be here, or I do not want to be in the presence of this particular thing, and I'm going to remove myself from that.
Mhm. Yes. There are there are limits of how we should be as a guest and how we should be as hospital as hosts. And one of them is that there are members of my family that can't eat gluten, and we have a member of our family who has Crohn's disease.
Oh,
This is
goodness.
very serious stuff, right? That if they put bread on your plate and say, "Please eat this bread," I can't, um, because I will spend the rest of the night and the morning somewhere else, either in the hospital or in the bathroom. That I just physically can't. And there
Right.
are others who have had their last drink and are in recovery. And so at the table, everybody pours wine and let's have a toast, and they're going to have to say, "I'm sorry, I must refrain." And it's not passing judgment on your host, and it's not saying,
No.
"I don't think that that's good," whatever. It's just that I physically that there will be
And there
retribution.
and there is a difference. Yesterday we had this wonderful gospel reading of how to deal with somebody sinning against you in the church.
Right.
And the thing that I pointed out and I hope got across to everyone was that Jesus is giving instructions to believers, people who are within the community.
Yes.
Right. So these are people with whom you should already have a close relationship. You should have met and spoken with this person before. This is not kind of an acquaintance who you barely know, hopefully, And so hopefully the person who serves you in hospitality knows your needs. And if they don't, you can politely say, like I have had to say on several occasions, I'm sorry, I'm allergic to shellfish.
You are.
I can't
Yeah.
eat that.
Yeah.
But you go ahead and eat. Don't worry about me. You go ahead and eat and enjoy it, and you can tell me all about it
Mhm.
and use good adjectives because I can't have it. You
Right.
know.
Right.
So I
Yeah.
think, Dave, as we kind of come back to what I think is at the heart of this, it's about respect.
Mhm.
It's about respect.
Yes. Um, and I'm going to say that God is the judge, and that God knows the situations that we're placed in. And
Hmm.
so do things out of respect, and love your neighbor. And, I think it won't be easy, but all will be well.
Yeah, and I just had an image in my mind that I think I want to use in the sermon perhaps this week,
Mhm.
which is to kind of joke about the customaries that churches will put out about, how do we worship and stuff like that, and how sometimes some customaries get very, very specific about how we do things. It doesn't always leave room for some of that variety that we've talked about.
Okay, like what? What's a very specific
Well,
customary?
I mean, like, cross yourself on, this genuflect at this particular 90-degree angle, stuff like that. And I mean, and sometimes there should be some uniformity to what we do, but like anything, we humans love to get out of hand. We love to take it too far.
And we like to judge one another.
Hmm.
And yeah, like when I was in seminary, and we used the alternative forms of the Eucharist, which means these prayers that I'm not familiar with when we bless the bread and the wine. And so I'm not familiar with this one that was being used. And when they were doing the blessing, it actually in my mind I thought, is it really blessed? And and God's like, that's my territory there, brother, man.
Well, I mean, if you want to get real specific, I mean, you have one kind of collar, I've got another one.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
And folks, my type of collar is the equivalent of putting one's hair up or wearing a hat. That this is so, it is, Alex. It is so much more comfortable than the one that you're wearing. And so if you see me wearing this one, it's like, oh yeah, Dave's just putting a hat on. Like he just didn't want to do his hair, you know?
Exactly. Well,
Uh,
since I don't have hair, I use this collar. So
yes. And I don't have I used to have hair I could put up, but
yeah. Well, and just it just goes to show you that speaking to the clergy here, we can be really bad about this.
oh my
We can
gosh.
be very on top of one another in such a way that we're not being hospitable or generous. So speaking to the clergy, we need to be careful about this first and
Right.
foremost.
You bet. I have a wooden cross, just a very plain wooden cross that on one Lent, and I don't wear the cross.
Hmm.
It's a whole separate discussion. But on this one particular Lent, I decided to wear it. I was at a clergy function, and a retired clergyman came up to me and said, "Oh, you're a part of this society, blah, blah, blah." And I said, "I'm not." "Well, then why are you wearing the cross of it?" "No, this is for Jesus." "No, it's not this is for the society, and you should only wear that cross if you're in the society." I'm like, I think this conversation's coming to a close.
Or you get the clergy person who says, only bishops wear pectoral crosses and such.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. So
Yes.
that's why I don't wear
Yeah.
like anything. I don't want to have that conversation. I keep my cross tucked underneath my shirt because
Yes,
that's personal devotion.
it is.
But yeah, so like I said, we as clergy, to kind of finish up here, we as clergy, we've got to be on top of this, create an environment where everybody can worship God,
Mhm.
and God is the one who is going to judge, not us.
Yes. And I just realized over my shoulder, I have a bunch of crosses. So,
Yeah, well, as long as you don't wear that big one, I think you're okay.
the funny thing is I did.
You
That
wore the big turquoise one.
Yes, who was the rapper in the 90s that wore the big old clock? Who
Flavor
was that
Flav?
guy? Was it Flavor Flav? Yeah. That I was joking around like wearing it because it weighs like, a good 8 pounds. And just in the office, that was it. Just because the person that gave it to me, I was really thrilled about it. But yeah. Anyway, there is a cross I got. It's this one. It has a little red to it.
Yeah.
I was given that in seminary, and it's very sweet. And that's about the only one I could wear. That's that.
So as we come to an end, take
So you're
heed.
wrapping this up,
Hopefully.
eh?
I'm wrapping us up
I
because we're
know.
about to go down another
Somebody
rabbit
has
hole.
to. Right.
I hope that everybody has had an opportunity to realize that there's a wonderful diversity within the church and to listen and share in that diversity. And that when you get ready for Thanksgiving, go and rewatch this episode of the podcast because you've got some instructions, you've got some opportunities. And if somebody puts a raisin in something,
Hmm.
just eat it. It's okay. Unless you're allergic to raisins, then don't
Unless
eat
you're allergic to raisins. Right.
it. Okay, but accept
Exactly.
the raisin.
Yes. And upcoming, you and I are going to have a conversation about Halloween and
Mhm.
Halloween parties and how to participate. Not how
Exactly.
to, but we'll give you an idea of some thoughts on how
Absolutely.
that all works. So,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Well, I appreciate your time today.
I appreciate your time, Alex. And thank you for keeping us on time.
That's my job. And
That's
we will look forward to seeing everybody in the next one.
all right. God bless.